When the floodwaters fell back into the silent seas, Noah opened the door of the ark and looked out upon a world that was empty. The mountains had been scrubbed clean. The valleys lay buried under mud and the bones of nations he had never known. He believed, as any survivor would believe, that the judgment of God had ended, that whatever had walked the earth before the rain had drowned with the rain, that the long terror was finally over. But Enoch, the seventh from Adam, who had walked with God and was no more because God took him, had seen something deeper than the deluge. He had seen what the waters could not reach. He had seen what was done to the watchers after the flood. And what he saw was not the end of judgment. It was the beginning of a longer, darker waiting that has not finished, even now, even today, even as you listen. To understand what was hidden beneath the earth, you must remember what fell from the heavens. In the days before the flood, 200 of the sons of heaven looked down upon the daughters of men, and they desired them. Their leader was Semjaza, and beside him stood names that the ancient scribes feared even to write: Armoros, Barachel, Kokabel, Ezekiel, Sariel, Shamziel, Tamiel, Daniel, Asael, and many more. They bound themselves with an oath upon the slopes of Mount Hermon, an oath that no fear of the Most High would break their unity, an oath that whatever they did, they would do together, that none would withdraw, that none would betray the rest. And then they descended. They took the daughters of men as wives. They taught them secrets that were not meant for the dust. Azazel taught the men to forge swords and shields and breastplates, to wear war upon their bodies like a second skin. He taught the women to paint their eyes, to dye their faces, to braid jewels into their hair, to turn beauty into a snare and a weapon. Barachel taught the reading of the stars. Kokabel taught the constellations and their meanings. Ezekiel taught the watching of the clouds. Armoros taught the breaking of enchantments. Shamziel taught the signs of the sun, and Sariel the courses of the moon. The earth filled with knowledge that the earth was never meant to hold. And the earth began to groan. From the unions of the watchers and the daughters of men there came forth a generation that the world had never imagined. They were called the Nephilim, the fallen ones, and the Gibberim, the mighty ones. They grew tall beyond the height of any man. Their bones were like cedar beams. Their hunger was the hunger of beasts that have never known a master. They devoured the produce of the earth, and when the fields ran empty they devoured the cattle, and when the cattle ran out they devoured the men. They drank blood. They turned upon one another. They built towers of bone and altars of skull, and the cry of the earth rose up to heaven like the cry of a wounded animal that knows it is dying. Then the holy ones in heaven heard the cry: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. They looked down and they saw what the watchers had done, and they spoke before the throne. They said, Lord of the ages, look upon the corruption of the earth. The watchers have taught the mysteries to the children of dust. The blood of innocents is poured out upon the ground. The souls of the dead are crying. And the Most High answered, and the answer was a flood. But hear this, for here begins the part that the world has forgotten. The flood was not aimed at the watchers. The flood was aimed at what the watchers had made. The bodies of the giants were flesh, and flesh could be drowned. The cities of corruption were stone, and stone could be buried. The bones of the wicked could be carried away in the rivers and lost forever beneath the sediment of a new world. The flood was a cleansing of the surface of the earth. But the watchers were not flesh. The watchers were spirit, and spirit cannot be drowned. So the Most High gave a different order. To Raphael, the healer, he said, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Open the desert that is in Dudiel, and cast him there. Place upon him jagged and sharp stones. Cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the great day of judgment he shall be hurled into the fire. And the earth which the watchers have corrupted, heal it, that all the children of men may not perish through all the secret things which the watchers have disclosed. To Gabriel he said, Proceed against the children of fornication, the children of the watchers. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy themselves in battle. And to Michael, the chief of the hosts, he gave the heaviest charge of all. Bind Semjaza and his associates who have united themselves with women. Bind them for 70 generations underneath the hills of the earth, until the day of their final judgment, until the eternal judgment is consummated. And so it was done. And no man upon the earth saw it. But Enoch saw it. And he wrote what he saw, so that the generations after him would not forget. The capture of the Watchers was not a thing of armies. It was not a battle. It was the closing of a hand. The archangels descended in light that was not light, in shapes that the language of men cannot carry. They came upon the Watchers in the high places where they still hid, in the caves of the mountains where they had run when the rain began, in the ruins of their fortresses where the giants had once feasted. The Watchers saw them coming, and they knew. And in that knowing, all of their power, all of their stolen knowledge, all of the oaths they had sworn upon Mount Hermon, became nothing. They stood naked of glory before the messengers of the Most High. And they wept. Enoch saw their faces. He saw beings that had once stood before the throne, that had once sung in the choirs of the holy ones, that had once been numbered among the morning stars. And now they were bent. Their shoulders were bowed. Their wings, if wings still remained to them, were folded and torn and trailing in the mud. Their eyes, which had once burned with the light of the upper heavens, were lowered to the ground. They could not look at the archangels. They could not look at one another. They could not even look upon the earth that had been their crime. The chains came next. And the chains were not iron. The chains were not bronze. The chains were not anything that a smith could forge or a hand could lift. They were of a substance that Enoch could not name. He said they were like a fire that did not burn. He said they were like a darkness that had weight. He said they were words. The chains were the words of the Most High made visible, and they bound the Watchers not by the strength of metal, but by the authority of the throne. And no Watcher could break what God had spoken. Then the earth opened. It did not split with thunder. It opened the way a mouth opens to swallow. The hills lifted aside as if they were curtains. And below, far below, deeper than any cavern, deeper than any well, deeper than any place a man might dig in 1,000 lifetimes, there yawned a pit. It had no bottom that Enoch could see. The air that came out of it was cold and old. It smelled of the time before time. It tasted of forgetting. And at the edges of that pit, the archangels led the Watchers down. They went one by one. 200 of them. 200 shapes of light made shameful. Their feet bound. Their hands bound. Their mouths sealed. The first to go was Azazel, because his crime had been the greatest, because he had taught the secret of weapons and the secret of beauty, and from his teaching the earth had run red and gold. He was taken to a separate place, to a chasm in the wilderness called Dudiel, and there he was thrown down upon stones that cut him, and the darkness was laid over him like a blanket, and his face was covered, and the Most High commanded that he should not see light again until the day of fire. He went down silent. Even Azazel, the great corrupter, had nothing left to say. Then came Semjaza, the leader, the first who had spoken the oath upon Mount Hermon. Enoch saw him pause at the edge of the pit and turn his face for one moment toward the sky, and there was no defiance in him, no pride, only a recognition. He had been the highest of those who fell, and he would be the deepest of those who were chained. He went down into the abyss, and behind him went the others, and the names that Enoch had once heard whispered in the courts of heaven, names that had carried the music of stars, those names were lowered into the dark. The procession of the Watchers into the pit lasted longer than any human chronicle could measure. Each one was lowered by his own length of word chain. Each one received his own command of silence. Each one was placed in his own measured place along the descending wall of the abyss, far from his brothers, far from the comfort even of a fellow prisoner's breathing. And as each was lowered, the chamber above grew quieter, and the chamber below grew heavier, and the weight that pressed upon the earth itself increased, until the soil of the world bowed slightly inward over the great prison, and the rivers above ran a hand's breadth lower for a generation, as if the earth itself was sinking under the weight of what had been hidden inside it. Enoch saw this. He wrote that the earth groaned when the Watchers were placed in her, the way a body groans when a heavy and bitter thing is swallowed. The chains held. The pit closed. The earth folded back over its mouth as if nothing had happened. Above, the sun came out upon a wet world. The clouds broke. Noah stepped out of the ark with his sons. He built an altar. He offered sacrifices. He smelled the smoke rising, and he believed that the world had been made clean. And it had been on the surface. But beneath his feet, beneath the soil where he would soon plant his vineyard, beneath the foundations of every city that men would ever build, there were 200 prisoners who had been alive when the stars were young. And they were not asleep. This is the part that the book of Enoch reveals that the rest of the scriptures only whisper. The watchers were not destroyed. The watchers were not annihilated. The watchers were not given mercy, and they were not given the end. They were given waiting. And waiting, for a being who has no death in him, is a torment that the human mind cannot measure. Imagine for a moment, if your soul can bear it, what their existence is. They cannot die. They were made before death entered the world, and the breath of the Most High in them does not depart. They cannot move. The chains hold every limb. They cannot speak to one another, for their mouths are sealed, and the pit is deep enough that even their thoughts seem to fall away into the dark before they reach a brother. They cannot see. The covering laid upon their faces was not a cloth, but a command. They cannot forget. Memory in them is as sharp as the day they fell, as bright as the moment Semjaza first looked down from the slope of Hermon and named his desire. They remember their crime, every hour, every century, every age, without rest, without distraction, without the human gift of forgetting that wraps our own sorrows in time. They cannot pray. The mouth that was sealed by the command of the Most High will not open for any words, neither of curse nor of praise. The only prayer they had was the one they sent through Enoch, and that prayer was answered, and the answer was the silence they now carry. They cannot weep. The eyes that were covered by the veil of darkness have no light to make a tear. They cannot turn. They cannot stretch a limb. They cannot mark the time by any sign of their own. They are not allowed even the small mercies that the lowest creatures know. The worm that crawls in the dust has more freedom than they have. The stone in the field has more rest. The dead in the ground have more peace, because the dead at least may sleep, and a watcher in his chamber may not. They have been in that place since before the pyramids. They were already there when Abraham left Ur. They were already there when Moses climbed Sinai. They were there when David sang, when Solomon built, when Jerusalem fell the first time and the second time and again. Empires rose and burned above their heads, and they did not stir. The languages of men were born and forgotten, and they did not hear. The continents shifted, the oceans changed their shores, the stars themselves drifted in their courses, and the watchers waited. They wait still. But if the watchers were imprisoned after the flood, why do so many ancient texts still speak of giant spirits, of shadows in deep waters, of beings waiting to return? Why does the book of Enoch itself say that the souls of the Nephilim still walk the earth, hungry, disembodied, unable to die, because the spirit that was in them was the spirit of an angel, and the body that was killed was only the body of a giant? Why do the old peoples in every corner of the world speak of Rephaim and Anakim, of shadows on the hills, of voices in the wells, of beings the sea remembers and the sea will not forget? The answer is this. When the giants died in the flood, their flesh was destroyed, but their spirits, born of the union of watcher and woman, were neither angel nor man. They had no place to go. They could not ascend to heaven, for they were not of heaven. They could not be admitted to the resting place of the dead, for they were not fully of the dust. So they remained. They roam. They are what the old scriptures call evil spirits. They are what the book of Enoch calls the spirits of the Nephilim, and the prophecy declares that they shall afflict and oppress and destroy upon the earth, that they shall cause lamentation, that they shall take no food, but shall thirst and rise up against the children of men and against the women, until the day of judgment. So the watchers are bound. But the children of the watchers, the disembodied giants, are not. They walk. They hunger. They whisper. And in every shadow that has no source, in every cold corner that no fire can warm, in every sea where ships have gone down and were never seen again, in every dream that wakes a sleeper screaming for a reason he cannot name, there is the trace of something that should not exist, and yet does, and yet waits. And the watchers in their pit know that their children still walk. This is part of their torment. They are bound, but they are not deaf to the world above them. Enoch tells us that the prayers of the watchers themselves rose up after their imprisonment. They begged for mercy. They asked Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, to carry their petition to the Most High, to plead that they might be forgiven, that they might be released, that the chains might be loosened. And Enoch, walking in the courts of heaven, did as they asked. He carried their words. And the Most High answered. The answer was no. The answer was that there would be no peace for the watchers. The answer was that they would not be forgiven. The answer was that their judgment was sealed. They had been beings of the upper light. They had known the truth. They had stood before the throne. and they had chosen the daughters of dust. There would be no return for them. There would be only the pit, until the great day. And what is the great day? The book of Enoch is plain. It is the day when the Most High will come with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. It is the day when the heavens will be shaken and the earth split open and every hidden thing brought up into the light. It is the day when the watchers will be drawn out of their abyss, not to be freed, but to be cast into the fire that has been prepared for them and for their kind. They will be burned, and the smoke of their torment will rise forever. The chains that hold them now will be broken only to deliver them to a chain that cannot be broken at all. And until that day they wait. Think on this, you who walk above them. Every step you take upon the earth is a step upon a covering laid by the hand of God. The soil beneath your feet is not only soil. The stone beneath the soil is not only stone. There are places in this world that the ancient maps marked with warnings and the modern maps have forgotten. There are mountains that the old peoples would not climb. There are wells that the priests sealed and the kings forbade to be opened. There are caves that the wisest of the ancestors filled in with rubble and inscribed with names of warning. These were not superstitions. These were memories. They knew. Enoch saw that the prisons of the watchers were placed in many parts of the earth. Not in one pit alone, but in chambers scattered across the deep places. Some are beneath the deserts. Some are beneath the seas. Some are beneath the mountains of the north, where the air is cold and the rocks have never known a footstep. The Most High did not gather all of his prisoners into a single cell. He scattered them, so that they could not speak to one another even if their mouths were free, so that the conspiracy of Mount Hermon could never be reformed. He divided them, and he sealed them, and he set seals upon the seals. And so, even now, somewhere beneath you, perhaps very far, perhaps not so far, one of them is. He is not dreaming. He is awake. He is bound, but he is aware. He hears, in some way that we do not understand, the steps of the generations that pass above him. He has heard the feet of every man and woman who has ever lived. He heard Abraham. He heard Pharaoh. He heard the Caesars. He heard the saints. He heard the conquerors and the conquered. He has heard you. He has heard you walking, today, this hour, this minute. And he is counting. He is counting toward the day when the 70 generations end. He is counting toward the great judgment. He knows it is coming, and he knows he cannot stop it, and he knows that what awaits him is worse than the pit, and yet he counts, because counting is the only act left to him. 200 watchers, in scattered cells, counting toward the same hour. The book of Enoch does not tell us when that hour comes. It tells us that it comes. It tells us that the 70 generations are not 70 human lifetimes alone, but a measure known only to the Most High. It tells us that no man knows the day, and no angel knows the day, and not even the watchers in their chains know the day, but only the Father. And it tells us that when the day comes, the earth will know. The earth will tremble. The seas will rise, and not because of any storm. The mountains will crack, and not because of any quake. And from beneath the soil, from beneath the water, from beneath the stones of forgotten places, the prisoners of the deep will be drawn up into the light at last, and the trial will begin, and the fire will be prepared, and there will be no escape and no plea and no mercy, because mercy was offered before the flood and refused. Noah survived the waters. Humanity began again. The vine grew. The cities rose. The languages multiplied and the nations spread. We built our temples upon the bones of older temples, and our roads upon the lines of older roads, and we walked still, upon the lid of a darkness we did not place there. The Most High placed it. The Most High sealed it. And the Most High alone holds the key. But beneath the earth, in places no man should seek, in chambers no torch should enter, in pits whose names the ancients tried to forget, the watchers wait for the day their chains will be remembered. They have not been forgiven. They have not been destroyed. They have not been forgotten by God. They have only been hidden from us for a time. And if you feel, sometimes, in the quiet of the night, a cold that has no cause, a fear that has no name, a sense that the ground beneath you is not as silent as it should be, do not call it your imagination. The book of Enoch warned us. The earth is old. The earth remembers. And beneath the world that Noah inherited, the prisoners of the first rebellion are still there. Bound. Awake. Counting. The day will come. The chains will be remembered. and the watchers will be drawn out.